History is a wild ride full of unexpected twists and turns. It is a story told in moments of extreme peril, when life hangs by a thread. For the Medici, a family that built an empire of power and art in Renaissance Florence, such moments were not rare. Their lives were a constant dance with danger, ambition, and the sharp edge of a blade. They were bankers, popes, dukes, and queens. They were loved and they were hated. And when the odds were stacked against them, some Medici proved masters of the daring escape. These are the shocking tales of when fortune turned its back and these powerful figures had to run for their lives. Number 1. Alessandro de Medici flees a tumultuous Florence. The year 1527 was a cataclysm for Italy and for the Medici family. News spread like wildfire across the Italian peninsula, a devastating report from the heart of Christendom. Rome, the eternal city, had fallen. Imperial troops, a massive army of mercenaries led by Charles V, had sacked the city. The unthinkable had happened. Pope Clement VII, a Medici himself, was trapped within the formidable walls of Castel Sant'Angelo, besieged and desperate. This event, known as the Sack of Rome, sent tremors through every city-state, including Florence. In Florence, the air crackled with tension. For years, the city had been under Medici control, first through a powerful Republican facade, then, more directly, through the young Alessandro de Medici. Alessandro was a complex figure, sometimes considered a dark prince, sometimes a necessary strongman. He was believed to be the illegitimate son of Pope Clement VII, or perhaps of Lorenzo de Medici, Duke of Urbino. Regardless of his true parentage, he was the current face of Medici rule in Florence. He was young, but he carried the heavy weight of his family's legacy and their current precarious position. With the Pope, the very bedrock of Medici power, incapacitated and held captive in Rome, the anti-Medici factions in Florence saw their chance. A surge of Republican fervor swept through the city streets. Whispers turned to shouts. Shouts turned to a roar. The people wanted the Medici out. They wanted their republic back. This was no ordinary protest. This was a revolution brewing. Alessandro, along with his cousin Cardinal Ippolito de Medici, another prominent young member of the family, found themselves in an impossible situation. Their magnificent Palazzo Medici, a symbol of their family's wealth and influence, suddenly became a gilded cage. The city that had been their domain now felt like a hostile land. Every window, every alleyway seemed to hold eyes, watching them, waiting for a sign of weakness. The Medici had strong supporters, of course, but the tide of popular opinion was turning swiftly and violently against them. The streets outside the palace were no longer safe. Republican mobs, emboldened by the news from Rome, began to gather. Their shouts grew louder, demanding the expulsion of the Medici, the restoration of popular government. The palace guards, though loyal, knew they could not hold back an entire city driven to a frenzy. The situation was dire. Staying meant certain death, or at the very least, imprisonment and humiliation. Alessandro and Ippolito had to act, and they had to act quickly. The decision was made to flee. Not a formal departure, not a proud exit, but a desperate dash for freedom. They could not simply ride out through the main gates. Those would be watched, possibly already barricaded by angry citizens. Their escape had to be clandestine, a vanishing act from their own home. The Palazzo Medici, like many grand Renaissance palaces, had its secrets. Hidden passages, secluded courtyards, and routes designed for discretion were not just for dramatic stories, they were practical necessities for families constantly navigating political intrigue and personal danger. Alessandro and Ippolito likely utilized one such secret exit. Some accounts suggest a passage leading from the palace directly to a lesser-known city gate, or perhaps one that led to a secluded garden from which they could slip away. The hour of their escape was cloaked in the early morning darkness or the confusion of a chaotic daytime. Details are scarce, as such moments are rarely well documented by those attempting to disappear. It would have been a hurried affair, perhaps a change of clothes, a simple disguise to blend in with the common folk, though their aristocratic bearing might have made such a deception difficult. They moved silently, perhaps with a handful of trusted retainers who knew the palace's hidden ways. They slipped out of the palazzo, leaving behind the immense wealth and power that had defined their family for generations. The noise of the city, the growing clamor of the uprising, would have been a terrifying backdrop to their silent flight. Each shadow would have seemed to hold a potential enemy, every distant shout a threat. They would have moved through the city's labyrinthine streets, avoiding main thoroughfares, keeping to the narrow, twisting alleyways that were the city's hidden veins. Their goal was to get beyond the city walls, to reach the open countryside where they might find safety among their remaining allies, or make their way to another city still loyal to the papal or imperial cause. The journey out of the city itself would have been the most perilous part. The city gates were not just for entry and exit, they were choke points, places where watchmen stood guard, where citizens could converge. To pass through without drawing attention would have required timing, luck, and possibly a bribe or two to a guard willing to look the other way. They did escape. Alessandro and Ippolito made it out of Florence. They left the city in the grip of a Republican revolt. Their flight marked a temporary end to Medici rule in Florence, a hiatus that would last for 3 years until 1530. The citizens, believing they had finally broken free, cheered the return of the Republic. Alessandro and Ippolito, meanwhile, rode away from their ancestral home, stripped of their power and their security, into an uncertain future. They were alive, but for a time they were exiles from the city their family had built. Number 2. Piero de Medici's desperate flight from Florence. The year was 1494. Europe stood on the brink of seismic change. The French king, Charles VIII, a young and ambitious monarch, had decided to assert his dynastic claim to the Kingdom of Naples. He marched his formidable army, one of the most advanced of its time, over the Alps and into Italy. This was no small matter. It was the beginning of the Italian Wars, a period of devastating conflict that would reshape the political landscape of the peninsula for decades. Florence, a wealthy and independent republic, found itself directly in the path of the French invasion. At the head of the Florentine state, though technically a citizen, was Piero de Medici. He was the eldest son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, the very man who had navigated Florence through decades of peace and prosperity. Piero, however, inherited his father's position but not his political genius. He was often described as arrogant, impulsive, and lacking his father's subtle touch. He was nicknamed Piero the Unfortunate, and for good reason. As Charles VIII's army advanced, Piero faced an immense challenge. His father, Lorenzo, had been a master of diplomacy, capable of playing rival powers against each other. Piero had no such skill. When the French king reached Florentine territory, threatening the city directly, Piero panicked. Instead of rallying his city or negotiating from a position of strength, he made a series of disastrous decisions. And Piero, in a move that would prove utterly humiliating and politically catastrophic, rode out to meet Charles VIII in person. He went not as a negotiator, but seemingly as a supplicant. Without consulting the powerful Florentine Signora, the city's governing council, he agreed to a humiliating treaty. He surrendered several key Florentine fortresses to the French Sarzana, Sarzanello, Pietrasanta, Pisa, and Livorno. These were vital strategic points, and giving them up without a fight was seen as an act of profound cowardice and betrayal by the Florentine people. News of the treaty reached Florence before Piero did. The citizens were outraged. Their famous Florentine pride was wounded. How could their leader, a Medici, surrender their fortresses, their sovereignty, to a foreign king without a single fight? The mood in the city turned ugly swiftly. The traditional loyalty to the Medici, cultivated over generations by Cosimo the Elder and Lorenzo the Magnificent, evaporated almost overnight. When Piero returned to Florence, he found a city transformed. It was no longer his city, not in the way it had been. He tried to ride through the streets to the Palazzo della Signoria, the seat of government, intending to explain or perhaps assert his authority, but the streets were not welcoming. The usual cheers were replaced by menacing silence, then by angry shouts. As he approached the palazzo, he was met not by deferential guards, but by stern faces and firmly closed doors. The guards at the Palazzo della Signoria, reflecting the will of the enraged citizenry, barred his entry. Piero de Medici, the ruler of Florence, was denied access to his own government. The Signoria, now emboldened by the popular discontent and their own fury at Piero's incompetence, was moving against him. The shouts in the streets grew into a roar. The people were no longer just angry, they were in open rebellion. The situation spiraled out of control with terrifying speed. The Signoria declared Piero a rebel. They stripped him of his authority. The bells of the city began to toll, signaling not celebration but alarm and uprising. Mobs formed. The shouts of "Popolo! Popolo! People! People!" filled the air, a demand for the old Republican freedoms, a rejection of Medici dominance. Piero was trapped. He could not enter the palazzo. He could not rely on the loyalty of the general populace. His own family was in danger. His magnificent palace, a symbol of their wealth and power, was no longer a sanctuary, but a potential target for the angry mob. He knew he had to flee. He gathered his closest family members and a handful of loyal companions. His brothers Giovanni, who would later become Pope Leo X, and Giuliano, were with him. There was no time for elaborate plans or disguises. This was a desperate dash for survival. They mounted their horses. The streets were already teeming with furious citizens, some armed. Their escape was a frantic, terrifying ride through the heart of Florence. They had to navigate a city that had turned against them, a city where every corner might hold a threat. They galloped through narrow streets, dodging angry citizens, trying to find a way out, to reach the city gates before they were fully secured by the Republican forces. The sound of the mob would have been in their ears, the danger palpable. They succeeded in getting out of the city. It was a chaotic and undignified exit for a family that had ruled Florence for 60 years. Piero, his brothers, and their loyal followers rode out of Florence, leaving behind a city in turmoil. Their palaces were quickly ransacked by the jubilant, vengeful mob. The Medici era in Florence, for a time, had come to an end. Piero and his brothers rode first towards Bologna, then on towards Venice, becoming exiles from the very city their family had made legendary. Their escape was not just a personal flight, it was the symbolic collapse of an entire dynasty's rule. Number 3. Lorenzo de Medici's miraculous escape from the Pazzi conspiracy. The date was April 26, 1478. Florence, the jewel of the Renaissance, was bathed in the spring sunshine. But beneath the surface of this vibrant city, a dark conspiracy had been brewing, a plot designed to rip the Medici family from the pinnacle of Florentine power. The Pazzi family, a rival banking house with immense wealth and ambition, had orchestrated a plan of chilling audacity. They were not alone. They had the backing of Pope Sixtus IV, who sought to undermine the Medici's influence in Tuscany, and various other powerful figures who resented the Medici's dominance. The target was Lorenzo de Medici, known to history as Lorenzo the Magnificent, and his younger brother Giuliano. Lorenzo was the very embodiment of Florentine power, a brilliant statesman, a patron of the arts, and the undisputed leader of the Republic. Giuliano was his popular and charismatic brother. The conspirators planned to strike when the two brothers were most vulnerable during High Mass in the magnificent Florence Cathedral, Santa Maria del Fiore. The sacred space was chosen for its symbolism and for the large gathering of people, which would hopefully provide chaos and cover for their deed. The atmosphere inside the cathedral was solemn, filled with the murmuring prayers and the rich scent of incense. Lorenzo and Giuliano stood among the congregation, surrounded by their friends, family, and the city's elite. The moment of the elevation of the host, when the priest raises the consecrated bread, was chosen as the signal for the attack. At this most sacred part of the Mass, when all eyes were fixed on the altar, the assassins would strike. Suddenly, the sanctity of the cathedral was shattered by brutal violence. Francesco da Pazzi and Bernardo Baroncelli, leading the attackers, lunged at Giuliano de Medici. In a horrifying flurry of blades, Giuliano was stabbed repeatedly. He fell to the floor, bleeding profusely, his life quickly ebbing away. The sanctuary became a scene of unspeakable horror. At the same instant, two priests, Antonio Maffei and Stefano Bagnon, turned their blades on Lorenzo. They had been tasked with the assassination of the elder brother. Lorenzo, however, was quicker, perhaps more fortunate. He was struck a blow to the neck, a glancing wound that drew blood but was not immediately fatal. His instinct for survival kicked in immediately. Lorenzo, despite his wound, reacted with lightning speed. He threw up his arm, wrapping his cloak around it as a makeshift shield to ward off further blows. The attack was sudden, but Lorenzo was not helpless. He began to retreat, moving away from the altar towards the nearby sacristy. His friends and loyal bodyguards, Francesco Nori and Andrea Cavalcanti among them, quickly moved to protect him, forming a human shield. The sacristy was a small room adjacent to the main body of the church, used for vesting priests and storing sacred vessels. It had a heavy wooden door. Lorenzo, with his protectors, managed to reach it. They burst inside, slamming the heavy door shut behind them. With a surge of adrenaline and a desperate need for security, they quickly barricaded the door from within, using whatever furniture they could find. The sounds of chaos and murder from the main cathedral would have been muffled, but still terrifyingly present. Outside the sacristy, pandemonium reigned. The congregation, witnessing the horrific attack, erupted in screams of terror and confusion. Many fled, fearing for their own lives. But some of the loyalists and the citizens who understood what was happening quickly realized the magnitude of the conspiracy. The cry, Paul, began to ring out, the rallying cry of the Medici family, referring to the balls on their coat of arms. It was a declaration of defiance, a call to arms for those loyal to Lorenzo. The conspirators, having succeeded in killing Giuliano, tried to press their advantage. They attempted to enter the sacristy, their blades dripping, eager to finish the job they had started. But the barricaded door held firm. The delay and the growing sounds of loyalists rallying in the square outside thwarted their immediate objective. Within the sacristy, Lorenzo's wound was tended to. It was not severe, but it was a chilling reminder of how close he had come to death. The air would have been thick with tension, the sounds of the unfolding drama outside filtering in. The conspirators, realizing their plan was unraveling, made their move towards the Palazzo della Signoria, hoping to seize control of the government. But it was too late. The people of Florence had risen up, not against the Medici, but for Lorenzo. The assassins were hunted down by the furious mob. Francesco de Pazzi was seized, dragged through the streets, and hanged from the windows of the Palazzo della Signoria. Archbishop Salviati, another conspirator, met the same fate. The conspiracy was brutally and swiftly crushed. Lorenzo, emerging from the sanctuary of the sacristy, found himself hailed as a hero. He had survived. His brother was dead, a terrible price, but Lorenzo himself had escaped assassination by mere inches through quick thinking and the loyalty of his companions. His escape from the Pazzi conspiracy cemented his power, proving to his enemies and his allies alike that he was a man of destiny, protected by fate itself. It was a terrifying ordeal that redefined his rule and the future of Florence. Number 4. Pope Leo X's ingenious escape from captivity. Before he was Pope Leo X, he was simply Giovanni de Medici, a young, ambitious cardinal from the powerful Florentine family. He was destined for greatness, but his path to the papacy was not without its harrowing detours. One such detour occurred in 1512 amidst the swirling chaos of the Italian wars. The year saw the French, under the command of Gaston de Foix, pitted against the forces of the Holy League, a coalition of powers including Papal States, Spain, and Venice. Cardinal Giovanni de Medici found himself in the thick of it. He was not a warrior, but as a papal legate, a representative of the Pope, he was present on the battlefield of Ravenna, a pivotal and bloody encounter. The Battle of Ravenna, fought on April 11th, 1512, was a brutal affair. It was one of the largest and most destructive battles of the Italian wars, a clash of pike formations, cavalry charges, and early artillery. Though the French achieved a tactical victory, they paid a terrible price. Their brilliant young general, Gaston de Foix, was killed in the final moments of the battle, leaving the French army victorious but leaderless and vulnerable. During the battle, Cardinal Giovanni de Medici was captured by the French. Imagine the humiliation and danger for a prince of the church, a Medici, to fall into the hands of an enemy army. He was taken prisoner, his fate uncertain. His capture was a significant prize for the French, a valuable hostage that could be used for ransom or political leverage. He faced the prospect of a long, humiliating imprisonment or worse. The French army, despite their victory, was in a precarious position. The loss of their commander, coupled with heavy casualties and the onset of disease, meant their triumph was short-lived. They began a slow, painful retreat northwards, burdened by their wounded and their prisoners. Cardinal Giovanni was part of this unhappy procession, guarded by French soldiers, likely under constant surveillance. Giovanni de Medici was not one to languish. He possessed a keen intellect, a charming demeanor, and an innate understanding of human nature. He began to observe his captors, looking for weakness, for opportunity. It was during this retreat that he identified his chance. The French army was stretched thin, their discipline beginning to fray under the pressure of the retreat, sickness, and the loss of their leader. His escape hinged on an ingenious plan involving one of his guards, a Gascon captain. How exactly Giovanni convinced this guard to aid him is not fully clear from historical accounts, but it likely involved a combination of bribery, persuasive words, and perhaps an appeal to the guard's conscience or greed. Or gold, a powerful motivator, would certainly have played a role. The offer of a substantial sum upon safe return would have been a tempting proposition for a soldier facing an uncertain future in a retreating army. The chaos of the French retreat provided the perfect cover. Accounts suggest Giovanni feigned illness, perhaps claiming to be too weak to continue, thus buying time and reducing the vigilance of his immediate captors. Then, under the cover of darkness or the general confusion of a river crossing, the moment arrived. The French army had to cross the Po River, a wide and challenging waterway. During such a chaotic movement, discipline would be at its lowest point. Giovanni, with the complicity of his bribed guard, made his move. He exchanged clothes with a servant or a peasant, a common but effective disguise for those needing to disappear. The simple, humble garb would have made him unrecognizable as a cardinal, allowing him to blend in with the local populace. Slipping away from the main column of French soldiers, he vanished into the night. It was a perilous journey. He was a prominent figure, and if his escape was discovered too soon, a manhunt would be launched. He would have had to move quickly and stealthily, relying on his knowledge of the local terrain and the help of his new confederate, the Gascon captain, or simply pure luck. He successfully made his way across the Po River. His journey was far from over. He was still deep in enemy territory, albeit behind a retreating enemy. He had to travel across Italy through lands that might be hostile or dangerous. His destination was Florence, his home, but first he needed to reach a safe haven. He made his way to Mantua, a city ruled by the Gonzaga family, who were allies of the Holy League. From there he continued to Verona, another friendly city. His escape was not just a personal triumph, it was a significant political event. The papal legate, captured and seemingly lost, had returned. His incredible stroke of luck, combined with the subsequent collapse of French power in Italy, paved the way for the Medici's return to Florence. Within a year of his escape, Giovanni de Medici was elected Pope, taking the name Leo X. His daring escape from the chaos of war and captivity was a testament to his resourcefulness and determination, a thrilling chapter in his ascent to the very pinnacle of power. Number 5. Pope Clement VII's daring escape from the sack of Rome. The year 1527 stands as one of the darkest chapters in the long and storied history of Rome. On May 6th, a massive army of imperial troops, a diverse force of landsknechts from Germany, Spanish soldiers, and Italian mercenaries descended upon the Eternal City. They were unpaid, unruly, and driven by a thirst for plunder. The city, usually under the firm control of the Pope, became a scene of unparalleled devastation. This was the sack of Rome, a brutal event that shocked all of Europe. At the heart of the chaos was Pope Clement VII, born Giulio de Medici. He was a Medici through and through, a cousin of Lorenzo the Magnificent, who had risen through the ranks of the church to become the supreme pontiff. But his papacy was plagued by political miscalculations, particularly his wavering alliances during the ongoing conflicts between the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and King Francis I of France. His indecision ultimately left Rome exposed and vulnerable. As the imperial forces breached the city walls, slaughtering the valiant Swiss Guard who defended the Vatican, Pope Clement VII and his cardinals were forced into a desperate retreat. Their only sanctuary was the formidable Castel Sant'Angelo, the ancient mausoleum of Hadrian, which had been converted into a papal fortress. It was a massive cylindrical structure seemingly impregnable. The Pope, along with a number of cardinals, other church officials, and loyal guards, scrambled into the Castel Sant'Angelo. The drawbridge was raised, and the massive doors were bolted shut. They were safe from the immediate slaughter, but they were now trapped. The imperial army, having unleashed their fury on the city, now settled into a siege around the castle. Life inside the Castel Sant'Angelo quickly became a grim struggle for survival. The supplies within the fortress were limited. Food and water became scarce. The disease, always a threat in crowded, unsanitary conditions, began to spread. The mental strain of being under siege, with the sounds of chaos and destruction echoing from the city outside, was immense. The future of the papacy, and of Clement VII himself, hung in the balance. The siege lasted for months. The Pope tried to negotiate, to buy time, to plead for relief from his captors. But the imperial soldiers were not interested in diplomacy. They had the upper hand, and they were intent on extracting every ounce of wealth and power from the trapped pontiff. Clement VII was effectively a prisoner, a pope held captive in his own fortress, while the city he ruled was pillaged around him. The situation grew increasingly desperate. Christmas was approaching, and still the pope was imprisoned. The conditions inside were unbearable. Prolonged captivity threatened not only Clement VII's life, but also the very dignity and authority of the papacy. A plan for escape began to form. It had to be daring, secretive, and flawlessly executed. The opportunity arose on December 6, 1527, under the cover of a cold, moonless night. A deal had been struck for a temporary cessation of hostilities, or perhaps the guards were simply lax due to the long siege and approaching holiday. Regardless, a window of opportunity opened. Clement VII decided to take it. He could not simply walk out as the Pope. His distinctive robes and appearance would give him away immediately. Disguise was essential. Accounts state that Pope Clement VII exchanged his papal vestments for the simple, humble clothes of a gardener or a merchant. He put on a peasant's cloak, perhaps donned a wide-brimmed hat, and possibly carried a basket of vegetables or some other innocuous item to complete the illusion. The goal was to look like any common person leaving the castle, blending into the shadowy figures that might move about the perimeter. He was accompanied by a handful of loyal companions, possibly a single trusted servant, or a few disguised guards who knew the secret paths. There was no grand procession, no fanfare, just silent, furtive movements. They made their way through the less guarded sections of the fortress, possibly utilizing a secret passage or a hidden postern gate that led out into the surrounding fields or overgrown parts of the city. The danger was immense. Every shadow could conceal an enemy soldier. Every rustle of leaves could betray their presence. They had to navigate past imperial sentries, relying on the darkness, their simple disguises, and sheer luck. The tension would have been excruciating. One wrong step, one cough, one moment of recognition, and the entire plan would unravel, leading to capture, or worse. They succeeded. The Pope Clement VII, the spiritual leader of millions, slipped out of his own prison. Once outside the immediate confines of Castel Sant'Angelo, a horse or horses were likely waiting for them. They would have mounted quickly, riding through the night, away from the ravaged city towards safety. Their immediate destination was Orvieto, a hill town in Umbria which offered a secure refuge. It was a difficult journey, made under the threat of discovery, but they pressed on. Clement VII eventually reached Orvieto safe but utterly exhausted. His escape from Castel Sant'Angelo was a moment of profound personal courage and a testament to his will to survive. It allowed him to continue his papacy, eventually reasserting papal authority, though the memory of the sack of Rome and his daring escape would forever mark his reign.